With that, we're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the roll call, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Smith. Director Rennie.
Here.
Director Sinks. Director Abekoga. Director Gibbons.
Here.
Director Ellenberg.
Here.
Director Elahi.
Here.
Director Tyson.
Here.
Director Flagger.
Here.
Alternate Director Ulo.
Here.
Alternate Director Marshall.
Here.
Thank you. I will note that Director Tovar is absent.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so first up is public comment on matters not on the agenda. Bruce, you wanted to talk to us.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. I have a short handout that basically reiterates what I'm about to say. I think there's an excellent opportunity for this CCA as well as other CCAs and also the member cities of all the CCAs to take action on a project that would enable cities that have a utility user tax to have a different tax rate for natural gas than for electricity. So as the leaders of an electricity utility, you probably think that your product shouldn't be taxed, and I agree with you. I think that electricity taxes should be decreased. But I also think natural gas taxes should be increased. And recently I've been engaged with some people from Albany and Emeryville and Berkeley, where there's an effort underway rather, to put a ballot measure on the Berkeley ballot in November that would authorize the city to raise its natural gas tax rate when that can be accomplished by PG&E, because right now PG&E's billing software doesn't allow the rates to be different. So I think that's terrific. It's a very Berkeley thing to do, but a very Silicon Valley thing to do would be to change the damn software so it can accommodate the differential tax. And so that's what I'm asking your support for. And I know that you can't take action since this isn't on the agenda, but I wanted to bring it to your attention now, not only because hey, there's a meeting tonight and this has just come up in the last few days, but also because all of your cities are involved in budget setting. And so the same request for funds that I'm making to SVCE could also be made to individual cities to kick in a little bit and to show cities throughout the 9-county Bay Area that, once again, Silicon Valley is leading on something, but it needs participation from across the region. So the specific ask is for $50,000 from SVCE to be put in the kitty to eventually pay for a software upgrade that may cost as much as $500,000 to $800,000. So it seems outrageous that it would cost that much, but there's actually some history that you can read about on the bottom of this page. Arcata, up in Humboldt County, had PG&E do a software change in their billing system, and it cost them over $600,000 several years ago. So I guess that's the price of progress, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other member of the public wish to speak on a non-agendized item? Okay, next up is our consent calendar. Action may be taken as a whole. Any member of this group may remove an item. Any member of the public may speak to an item on the consent calendar. Anybody want to remove something, talk about something, or somebody want to make a motion? I got to look all directions now. It's a little confusing.
Did you call for public comment? Second.
If I get a motion in a second, then I'll do the public comments.
Second.
So we have a motion in a second. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak on anything on the consent calendar? I'm seeing none. I felt like I had a motion in a second. Does anyone up here or down here wish to speak on anything on the consent calendar? Seeing none, then we're going to call the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. The CEO report.
Chair Miller, members of the board, I'd like to introduce our... Hi, Rod.
Yeah, it's a little different right now.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I'd like to introduce our newest employee, Eric Kim, and we hired him from the California Independent System Operator. He's going to come up to the podium and introduce himself to you.
Good evening, board members. My name is Eric Kim. I'm coming from the California ISO, as Girish has introduced me. I spent about 8 years there, but before then I was at UC Davis with the Environmental Policy and Planning degree, and then worked at the California ISO. Some of my major tasks there was to integrate our energy storage models as well as our demand response models in our market policy team. So anything that touched upon our real-time market, as well as our transmission and planning areas of the California ISO. But one thing I've had a couple weeks now to get up to speed, is that the few things I did work on at the California ISO to lead the wholesale market of integrating these new DERs and energy storage models. I think the same needs to happen with the CCAs, and Silicon Valley Clean Energy seemed to be the perfect place to do that. So that is why I'm here. I'm very excited. And just something personal about myself, I like to push myself physically, so I'm a ultramarathon runner as well as a rock climber. I know that there's some amazing areas in the area, some hills that I could run and also just climb. So I'm really looking forward to that. But really just looking forward to pushing the boundaries here of how we can lead to a carbon-free future. So thank you very much.
All right, welcome. Tony.
Mr. Miller, I just wanted to reflect that I think it's time that the organization graduated out of the dubious practice of hiring Stanford grads to hiring UC Davis environmental policy graduates. Yes. Go Ags.
We're evolving, alternate
Glad
director,
to
you
see
allow.
it.
We're getting better.
There's a few of us here from Stanford. I don't see the problem. All right,
Okay.
back to our CEO report.
Thank you. I have by the way, I'll just tell you that I have 3 updates. Don Eckert, sorry, is it Don Bray? Don Bray is going to be giving you an update on rates. And go ahead. And as he gets up there, I'll just tee up. The next update is going to be on legislative issues, which will be handled by Rod Sings and myself.
Just do the whole thing without touching that. I'm watching the hands go all to the same spot.
All right, good evening, directors. I am a proud UC Davis graduate from back in the day, so it's just thought I'd get that out there. So all signs are pointing to a really significant change in PG&E rates effective as of May 1. And as many of you know, we don't get the precise values for those rate changes until just before the first, typically the week before. So we have a general sense for what the shape of those changes are going to be. We think we'll have about a 20% increase in the PCIA and about a 5% decrease in the PG&E generation rate. This is pretty much a double whammy, which means very significant downward pressure on our rates. To remain competitive with PG&E, we'll have to reduce our rates. We also think it will probably be smart to reduce our discount, probably take our discount back to the 1% level that we had during our first year of operation. So we'll come in with a pretty full report on this at the next board meeting, the April board meeting. We'd like to have the board vote on effectively a discount policy that we can then invoke just as soon as we have the actual PG&E rates, and then we can make those rate changes effective just as soon after the 1st of May as possible. So we'll bring that to you at the next board meeting. We'll work with the finance team on what the implications are for our contributions to reserves and so forth, but we just wanted to kind of prime the ground here for a significant discussion on that next time.
Okay, don't move because I'm sure there's a few questions. We'll start here with Liz.
Thank you. Double whammy for sure. So I think, and this may not be an easy or answerable question at this point, but we have mentioned it before. PG&E's PCIA is a black box. And we've been trying to make progress at getting some insight into that. And I'm guessing that we haven't had a lot of success with that. But when they do things like this, increasing the PCIA and dropping the price, it seems like it's manipulation.
As natural gas prices decline, our PCIA will go up and their generation rates will go down. But any other comment? I think Rod has a comment that might dovetail with that.
So I was interested if, maybe you're not the right person to answer this, but if we've modeled what the effects of an economic downturn as a result of the issues that we're all facing as institutions. I mean, we have a lot of our major employers with employees working from home. I don't know if that means that, there'll be less air conditioning demand. I mean, we're not to quite that season yet, but I'm just wondering if we've modeled several months of reduced electricity, or if we frankly don't anticipate much due to current circumstances.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's doubtful that residential demand would be affected. It conceivably could go up if more people are at home.
Yeah, sure.
But that's only a third, right, of our energy usage. So, yeah, more likely that there could be some downward pressure on utilization in the commercial sector. How significant that would be, it might be something we could monitor. I mean, looking at usage over the next few weeks here, just to see if we start to spot any trends. Of course, if we use less, we don't have to procure as much, but there's an equation there, and we could work with the supply team on what the impact of that could be.
Director Sinks,
I'd certainly appreciate that, yes.
if I may add to it. Thank you, Don.
I mean,
I'd
do
say
those of
this-
you in the business for a long time, after other big events in the world, did you see a substantial change? Maybe that's another way to think
Yeah.
about it.
So when I think of this event, the only thing I can remember I can correlate it to is 9/11,
Yeah.
where the entire world was impacted. And this may have even a bigger impact personally. Every single individual potentially is going to do something different. I think there's a high likelihood that our load will not have the little growth that we expected. But overall, everything that we're seeing from Moody's Analytics, McKinsey, Outlook, all that, when they're looking at reduction in GDP over the year, over different sectors of the globe, most of them are expected to come back in Q3 and Q4. So the way in which we would mitigate this, and this is the reason why we have reserves, it's for the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. And this is one of those. Thank you.
A black swan, so thank you very much.
Any, Javed?
I guess if you're exploring the effects of the coronavirus, my question may be too legal. How are our agreements? Are there some clauses in there if we need to get out of an agreement? Would this particular issue help us do it? Or if the other party wants to get out of an agreement, does this rise to the level of acts of God or whatever do come in the agreements? And if they're not in our current agreements, whether this is something we need to look at going forward in other agreements?
Yeah. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, we got a lot of agreements and a lot of parameters.
I wouldn't know offhand. My sense is probably not. I don't think the agreements that we've ever contemplated probably this type of situation. There can be force majeure clauses, though, and that could actually apply. So that would have to actually be individually looked at.
Yes. So I'm suggesting if they're not there, maybe we need to look at it, at least in the future agreements that we're entering into.
Okay, and are there other, Tony?
I guess looking at this, I could actually move this. I guess looking at this challenge from another angle, have we consulted with our partners, I'm thinking of like our scheduler, to see how they're prepared to respond if they happen to have a catastrophic office illness?
We have reached out to our billing agent and our scheduler for continuity of operation plans. And maybe remind, but we do have this item agendized for the special meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So we'd be happy to talk about it in more detail then.
Okay, it's hard, it's weird to look around. I just don't, if somebody thinks I'm missing them, just start screaming. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Rates is our least present thing. Thanks for coming up and giving us the bad news. Grish.
Yes, so yesterday was CalCCA's lobby day. Thank you, Director Sinks, for accompanying us to Sacramento. Big picture, CalCCA is sponsoring 2 bills. One bill is being authored by Assemblymember Kalra, having to do with transparency of costs that are imposed on CCAs. And we'd like to get basically more information on how those costs get calculated. So opening up the black box a little bit, and also the non-disclosure agreements associated with how people can actually see those contracts and costs today. They're extremely restrictive, and as a result, very few people can actually see those contracts. A second bill that is sponsored by Assemblymember Marasucci is around the Central Reliability Authority, and you'd recollect that Hillary updated you on the residual central buyer concept from last year for resource adequacy. And we entered into a settlement agreement with a variety of generators and San Diego Gas and Electric, an investor-owned utility, filed that settlement with the CPUC, and this legislation attempts to put into law what the settlement is trying to do. We had a very productive meeting. I'm going to hand it over to Director Sinks to maybe give a broad overview of the day.
Well, first we had a robust delegation from all over the state. And I have to tell you, from prior trips to Sacramento, you know, where 2 years ago Cal CCA was Beth, what's her last name?
Vaughn.
Beth Vaughn, right. One person, completely overwhelmed, always playing defense, to now we have, you know, Los Angeles, the Los Angeles area is in with the biggest CCA, serving 1 million people or more, right?
Million, you're right.
1 million, okay.
Million
Cal CCA is staffed up. They will continue to grow, and I certainly support what they've done. They've hired good lobbyists, as have we. Now, instead of playing defense, as you've heard, we are running 2 bills this year. And I think it's entirely appropriate. You know, with San Jose in, we've got another 1 million plus. The great news is they basically said, we want to run a bill on transparency. I know Girish has been a champion in wanting to do this for 2 years, but it's hard to get everybody on board. San Jose always adds extra weight to things, right? So I think this is going to be the key driver that helps us entertain a different conversation in the state, including at the PUC, on the PCIA and how it is better handled. And there were a number of really creative suggestions. I mean, what you need to know also is by expanding our territory, we have also expanded the number of high-performing CEOs across the state who, to me, were so impressive as we met, and they articulated what their CCAs have done. We're not all the same, but everybody's adding their creativity and their sauce to the mix, and we are all going to be stronger for it. So I think what's critical is that this movement of community choice energy continue to grow, that we foster and make it possible to remove or attempt to remove some of the barriers that the newcomers are facing, which is in no small measure the PCIA, that we all be prepared to mobilize to move these 2 bills through and show our clout. And frankly, if you look at the materials now on the Cal CCA website, you will be impressed at how far we've come, how much of the state is covered. I would say the tone in Sacramento is quite a bit different. People are recognizing, acknowledging the difference we've made. Another material we handed out was how much carbon-free and renewable energy procurement we've done. And there's a comparison by CCA. So we all are different in that regard, but it's very clear that the false messages, the fake news that's been put out about us not making a real difference just isn't the case. the facts are telling, and we now have the data to demonstrate what's going on. So I'm thrilled with our progress. I would say that, you know, we can't rest. We still have Garcia's AB 56 and other bills that would basically threaten our very existence. But we now have the ability to better organize, mobilize, and have our voice heard in Sacramento, if not at the PUC. So, yeah, hats off to Girish. I can also see he's a leader among leaders in terms of the CEOs that are there, but I'll tell you the overall quality from, you know, everybody, Valley Power, the Los Angeles CCA. I mean, we really have a fine group of leaders that's going to bring us to a better place in the next few years, assuming the legislature and the PUC let us do it. So thank you.
I'm gathering that your report is that it was a successful legislative action day.
Yes.
Yes, good.
We will continue to keep the board involved through the ad hoc legislative committee and through monthly reports. And since Director Sinks talked about the PUC and existential risk and other threats, I'll invite Hillary to give us an update on our regulatory activities.
Good evening,
Don't
everybody.
touch that. Get your hands off.
All right. Well, first I'm going to do one quick addendum to the legislative discussion because I'd like to echo everything that Girish and Director Sinks just said. But one other piece, it's really exciting to be in a place now where CalCCA is sponsoring legislation for the first time. But in addition to all the work that we've done explicitly on the legislative side, there's a huge amount of work that's been done on the regulatory side to create the ideas that are now going into those bills. So I want to give a special shout out to the team here, especially my colleague Poonam Agarwal, who's been one of the key regulatory people on issues like PCIA and rate setting here, and our counterparts over at the other CCAs, because those bills, there was a lot that went into those bills from a much bigger group of people than the ones who end up walking the halls in Sacramento. So big thank you to all my colleagues here and at other CCAs, because it's taken a couple years to build out those ideas, and now we're pushing them, and it's really exciting. So thank you everybody for that. But switching over to the regulatory side, it is a really busy month. We got about 15 filings that we're putting in the month of March. And this is, even as Don mentioned, we've now wrapped up our annual rate-making cycle. So what we're doing now, there are just a lot of ideas churning on reforms for basically all of our biggest regulatory areas. So we have, in the PCIA reform space, the final versions of those resource allocation ideas that we've been talking about on the procurement side for months now. We've got, on the RA side, a number of reforms, even apart from the central buyer idea, looking at, as the grid mix changes and we try and push further down the decarbonization curve, how should you count different emerging resources like solar plus storage in the RA framework, trying to make sure that we can plan as accurately as possible and give everything the value that it should have in that framework. And then on the integrated resource planning side, we're continuing our internal work, which we'll hear a little bit about later tonight, but also working at the CPUC still on their statewide modeling exercise, the reference system plan, giving them feedback on what their vision for the whole sector should look like as we approach 2030. So there are a lot of ideas in circulation this month, and our biggest focus, apart from our continuing internal work on the IRP and the rate setting, is to make sure that we're representing SVCE and the whole CCA community in that space. And the last thing I'll add is that the direct access expansion report, we were expecting that Monday, on the 9th of March. We don't have it yet, which means that it should arrive at any moment. And so we'll get from that what the CPUC's recommendation is on further expansion of direct access, which we have yet to see anything on that in the legislature this session, but we are expecting that that is a report for the legislature and that there could well be some response to that later in session. So, as Garish mentioned, we'll continue to address that in the ad hoc committee and look forward to working on all of this. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any questions? Nope, very thorough. Thank you very much.
That's the end of my report. Thank you.
All right. Tony?
At the end of the CEO report, I think it would be appropriate for us to thank Mr. Sinks for taking the time to go to Sacramento yesterday. Beautiful Sacramento. I know it's quite a junket. But personally, thank you, and I'm sure all of my fellow board members do as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, is there any member of public who wishes to comment on the CEO report? Seeing none, we're going to move right along. Next up, clean energy procurement and IRP update. Just don't touch anything wherever you sit. You're good though. We got those wipes over there too, so if you...
No.
Yeah, you're going to have to touch that one.
Sure, make
All right. Good evening,
Great.
directors. So I have just a quick update on our efforts towards developing the integrated resource plan. Hillary mentioned it a little bit earlier today that we've been working really hard internally on creating, looking at a set of resources and different alternatives and running a bunch of scenarios so that ultimately when we put together this integrated resource plan, which you'll be seeing in the next couple of months and hopefully approving for us to submit to the CPUC, that you have comfort in what we've put in front of you as something that has gone through some rigor. But just to give you a quick update, I have two items to talk about tonight. One is just a quick status update on where we are with respect to meeting our energy procurement goals for clean energy, that is, and then again, our integrated resource plan. So for the clean energy procurement update, I feel like I'm here every month talking about this, so I kind of feel like some of this should be not new to any of you. But if you recall, we had an RFP that we issued back in 2017, and through that process, we basically signed 3 PPAs to get us to about 20% of our renewable portfolio standard needs. And then we issued another RFP in 2019, and through that process, we shortlisted 6 different developers, 4 solar plus storage and 2 geothermal. You approved the first geothermal project back in January. You'll have another chance to look at another geothermal project tonight, and we intend to bring you the 4 additional PPAs before June. So in total, we'll get to another 20% for a grand total of 40% of our long-term needs for renewable energy being met by 2023, 2024. So we're making a lot of progress. It's quite an effort though, and there's a big team, and we're quite confident that we'll bring at least 5 of 6 to you for approval. So switching gears to the IRP, I think we've talked about this as well on a couple of occasions, but just to remind you, an IRP planning is basically looking at a set of resources and combining those resources into what we call portfolios, or as we like to call them here, shopping carts, to develop what we call an optimal mix of resources for SVCE. So the exercise that we're doing in the context of what the California Public Utility Commission requires us to do is to really produce a report for compliance purposes. So by July 1st, 2020, we have to submit to them something that conforms to what they need to see us doing in order to meet the statewide goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The good news is that our internal goals, the ones that the SVC Board of Directors and community have set for us, far exceed what the state would like to get in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. So for the portfolio that we'll put in front of you, we are fairly confident we'll meet the CPUC's goals as well. So if you recall again, when we set out to look at how we would evaluate and measure different resources and portfolios, we had some key planning objectives, and these objectives are pretty much the same as what the state requires in the IRP, that we look at decarbonization, reliability, and affordability, and that we balance these objectives together. And so when we were modeling these different resources, we attributed metrics to each of these measures or each of these objectives and evaluated the portfolios against them. And if you recall too, the whole reason we're undertaking this exercise, aside from the fact that we have to produce a report to send to the CPUC for compliance purposes, is because we have this amazing opportunity to kind of figure out how are we going to meet this big clean energy directive that you set for us. We've only to this point committed to about 30% of our clean energy needs on a cumulative basis between now and 2030. So we have quite a bit of procurement left to do. And so the process of going through this integrated resource planning has allowed us to kind of look at how different resources best meet those objectives that I talked about, and more importantly, meet our long-term goals. This is just to recap how we actually set our constraints or our directives on modeling. It was based on some direction that the board had provided to us back in, I believe, October now. And so through that effort, you essentially told us which resources to consider, which ones not to consider, and how to set our renewable portfolio standard target. My favorite graph here, the shopping carts, we actually modeled each of these different resources, again, against those metrics. And we're now just kind of churning and digesting the information that we've learned through that process to kind of figure out how to best present it to you as a board in the context of the IRP that you'll be reviewing probably in May, but definitely no later than June. So up here, when you combine our procurement efforts, which we're doing in parallel to developing this planning document, you can see we still have quite a bit left to do. And just to recap, we have essentially the 5 additional PPAs that we'll be bringing to you as a part of our procurement effort, and then the IRP that we're going to bring to you for approval in looks there like May. And then in addition to that, we also have this discussion about the PG&E carbon-free allocation, which I believe Garish is bringing to you in April for discussion. And then last, in June, we have an opportunity to take a very small percentage of a very valuable long-term resource called Western Area Power Administration, large hydro out of the Central Valley Project, which runs through, I guess, San Joaquin Valley. So with that, I will take any questions.
Oops, the slides went away. I was going to say, could we go back to the shopping cart slide briefly? I think somebody's going to have to restart the presentation.
Did I end it? Oh, there it is.
Those 3 blank slides at the end. So, just because you and I have had a few conversations, you made it sound like you're doing a little bit of work to figure these things out. It's my understanding that you guys are doing extensive modeling on each one of these options, not only to figure out which one kind of looks best on an annual basis, but you're doing far more elaborate modeling to make sure it's a real value to us in meeting the goals. Maybe you could spend just a few more words on how extensively you're going into this.
Sure. If we just kind of go back a couple of slides when we talk about the metrics that we looked at. For starters, when we looked at decarbonization, we looked at it from 2 perspectives. One, how well do each of these resources and sets of resources measure up against decarbonization, measuring it on an annual basis, which is our current policy, that we try to achieve carbon-free every year. And then looking at it from what's called a clean net short position, so looking at every single hour of the day for every year and seeing where we have hours that are not covered by a carbon-free resource or a clean resource, and then what are those emissions associated with that hour. So we did that calculation, and it was quite telling. We're learning about quite a bit from that process itself. From a reliability standpoint, we looked at 2 main metrics. The first one being How do we meet our resource adequacy requirements as they're mandated by the state? And they're very kind of set. You must buy this amount of megawatts in this location for this time period. So we looked at that, looked at each of the portfolios or the set of resources and see how they stacked up against meeting that requirement. But then more importantly, this is something that's not required, but something that we felt was really important to do nonetheless, was we looked at each of those resources and sets of resources and saw whether they were able to deliver energy in what we call these availability hours, which are kind of the new net peak or the 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. hours. So currently the resource adequacy requirements are not intended to cover those hours, and that has resulted in some major deficiencies that are being recognized by the state, both at the CalISO level and at the CPUC. So we undertook that exercise to see, well, how well do we do there? And then last, looking at affordability, both from a levelized cost, what is the cost of this portfolio versus this portfolio? And then more importantly, what's the variability of that cost within that portfolio? How much could it move one direction or another?
You said some analysis. This is
Yeah,
a lot, and so I am grateful for that deeper dive. I have had some discussions with Monica, and they're doing great work and forward-thinking work for us to make sure that we're good grid citizens and a leading CCA. So I just thank you guys for letting me put that question out first.
Sure, and I probably went through this a lot faster than I should have, but just to kind of also add, we'll ultimately have to pick one kind of portfolio or plan to submit as part of our CPUC compliance document. That's what's called our preferred system plan. And I think that's what it's called. Hillary, correct me if I'm wrong. And right now we're settling on a particular portfolio that resembles pretty much what we're doing from a procurement standpoint. That plan, we have to measure it against the state's requirements, and that's where I mentioned I think we're going to do very well. But ultimately, when you approve the IRP, you're approving a plan that will be in place until we change it. And since we have to change the IRP every 2 years, we have this opportunity to relook at it every 2 years.
Update every 2 years.
Update every 2 years, yeah.
All right. Any of my fellow board members have questions? Let's start with George.
No, sure. Thank you, Monica. I had a question about how we model large hydro. Do we take a 10-year average of water flow or how do we make sure that we've got something that's really robust?
Yeah, so that's, hydro is one of my favorite things to model, and we didn't really model it with the robustness that I would like to model it for this go around, only because the type of hydro resources that we tend to acquire tend to be under these contracts that have basically like a fixed quantity. So it's not like we're taking a run-of-the-river type resource, whereas most people who own or operate, or entities that own and operate, they really have to care about the variability associated with the hydro, because if the water doesn't flow or if it doesn't rain and the hydro doesn't get produced, then they don't get a resource. But for the most part, we modeled ours as like contracts where we get a set quantity. Having said that, though, the CPUC does require, if we include large hydro in our portfolio or our reference system or preferred plan, that we address the variability of hydro. Because even though we contract for this stuff, we're still subject to variations in precip and everything else that happens in California or the Northwest. So we're going to look at that a little closer, because as it stands now, a large share of our resources, clean resources, are anticipated to come from hydro.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Questions? We go, Rod?
Thank you. I've had an opportunity to talk to a SMUD board member recently, and also Don Weitz of MCE, asking them, how are you solving the resiliency problem? That is, we know that if you want to handle the duck curve for a few hours with solar plus storage, we can readily do that, right? And so 4 of the contracts you're pursuing do that. But once you get beyond a few hours, to have battery storage that goes for days and days and days is so impossibly expensive, it seems. And so both MCE and SMUD are exploring the use of hydrogen, that is inexpensive solar, typically, coupled with electrolysis to make hydrogen, store hydrogen, and then burn it in a, consume it in a fuel cell. And this technology is already available, albeit expensive. I wonder if that's part of, or part of the scenarios you're thinking about or working through.
Yeah, we didn't look at that for this go-around, and it's one that we probably, as the state considers it as part of its planning, like in the reference system plan, it's something that we'll have to take a look at how it makes sense, or if it makes sense for us as well. But this go-around, we did not model it.
I will say that among legislators, both our lobbyists and the questions we received yesterday, there was a lot of interest in how we could be resilient. PG&E's plan, incidentally, is to get into this business and put little generators all over their service territory, particularly in urban areas where there's a lot of load. The Air District has sent a letter of concern to the PUC about the emissions effects of burning either diesel or even natural gas. And I mean, I sure have an interest in seeing if we could provide an alternative in a timely fashion to this idea that we need to continue to burn fossil fuel to work our way through resiliency effects. And I'd like to see this agency take leadership on that.
So
We had a great resiliency press conference a few months ago in Fremont, but I think we ought to be working on this.
There's our immediate need and there's a long-term vision. Girish?
Yeah, I understand.
So I think there are two terms that are being used interchangeably so far, resiliency and reliability. Those are two different concepts. I think you've brought up both concepts in your comments.
Yes.
Resiliency is the ability to spring back after an event. Reliability is about the entire grid staying alive for long periods of time as you bring in resources like solar and wind. Two different kinds of solutions for them. And then as far as fuel cells, I want to frame this discussion too. The IRP and our procurement kind of go in parallel. Adopting the IRP doesn't necessarily restrict us to doing exactly what that IRP says till we develop another IRP. We can actually add in any kind of resource we want to.
This is for compliance purposes.
This is for compliance purposes.
Yeah, I understand.
So that is a concept as you look at this, even in the PG&E allocations, which are going to be coming to us in the fourth quarter of this year. That can't really be modeled very well in the IRP. So as far as fuel cells and things like that, right now, even the efforts that SMUD is doing and MC is doing in hydrogen, it literally is in the third decimal place of what we are looking at to fill our gap right now. We can add it to the IRP as recommendations of what we're going to do, but it's actually to fill in that net open position, we need very large resources. So it's an and. We will put it in,
okay.
but it's not at this level.
I'm not asking you to do something unnatural, and yeah, you reminded me that, yeah, we have a regulatory filing to make. I just wonder if we do put something in, if we're beginning to send a signal, right, about our intentions, and if there's any value there. So I noted you talked about us having 40% of our load covered by long-term contracts, right? Which seemed that perked up the ears of some of the folks we met with yesterday.
Yeah, and that's exactly, yeah, once we finish the second tranche, if we get all 6 of these contracts signed.
Well, don't do any unnatural act, just based on my comment. So,
it's been a lot of work. A lot of work already.
So I've also seen some of it in the risk committee, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. And I think, the only other comment I'd have is if we can continue to appear as a reasonable player, right? We understand we're going to needing to meet our need 24/7. We understand we're going to need more base load power. We understand we're going to need dispatchable power. You know, I'm supportive of us looking like the responsible party we are, because, you know, frankly, one of the arguments we're making to the legislature is, and the governor is, how about if CCAs and for those territories that don't have them, right, some sort of community benefit corporation can be created. We could handle generation throughout PG&E's territory. So I support us looking like the responsible party. We need to step up and be. Thanks.
Okay, are there other questions? Lisa.
Thank you. So Girish already answered my question, Monica, but I just wanted to confirm. So of these 3 different portfolios, all meet the state requirements?
Yes, so this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the state requires well, the state target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 46 MMT by 2030. What we're going after is essentially reducing our share of that to 0. So we will have met that requirement just by essentially meeting the RPS requirement, or the 60% RPS by 2030, which each of these portfolios does and goes beyond.
And it's for our board to decide which of these 3. I'm just trying to understand the process, because the IRP, based on your report, is for 3 years. It's from 2021 through 2023.
The IRP is a 10-year look
through
2030, so 2021 through 2030.
Okay.
And what we'll be doing in the next couple of years to get to that point. And so what we will bring to you is a recommendation, is an IRP for your approval, which will have what we call a preferred portfolio. And that preferred portfolio is the one that we believe best meets our community objectives and balances those affordability, reliability, and decarbonization goals.
And to Director Singh's point, because I want to make sure there's flexibility built into this,
Sure.
especially because now you're saying it's actually for a 10-year period as opposed to 3 years, which I thought. And so with our long-term contracts and all our planning ahead, there is flexibility built into each of these portfolios. And as Girish said, we can even add to this. We're not locked in with these resources listed for each portfolio.
Right, so this is essentially just a guiding plan. Where we do commit or lock in is when we actually bring you a resource to approve.
Okay.
And so when we bring you a 10-year or a 15-year or a 20-year contract, for that matter, then you've essentially put this plan in action to some extent.
And then the projected approval dates you have for the different long-term agreements, it's on another slide. What are those projected dates based on? Like, I think you're bringing a contract back to us in April and maybe another one.
Right, so those are, when we did our solicitation, our RFP for the long-term renewables in 2019, the developer proposes to us when they think they can get their project online. The only requirement one of the requirements that we had in that solicitation process is that their project had to come online no later than January 1st, 2023. Because we needed it to be online so that we could get the renewable energy so that we could meet our compliance requirements.
Thank you.
Monica, just for clarity, this is not our first IRP.
No, we submitted our first one in July 2018, and yeah, so we have to do this every 2 years.
And our 2019 RFP matched how it was supported by that IRP. And so every 2 years, we get to massage the IRP, and then even within that, we get to do our business that we need to do. So I'm thinking we got 2 levels of flexibility for you. Okay, are there other questions? Go, Rob.
Just a short comment. I want to say that I appreciate the modeling on what you call the net clean short, which is really talking about, is our grid clean 24/7? And we know it's not clean 24/7. We're carbon free if you do an annual accounting, but we really need to start thinking about how do we go to the next level and help reduce the carbon content during the hours of the day when it's dirty. So I appreciate that you're starting to do that work, and I assume we're going to have more discussions in the future about that.
Great, thank you, Rob. Tony.
Monica, I'm sorry. Oh.
I can hear you.
You can hear me. I had actually 3 questions, and the last one might be multidimensional. But is there a simple reason why the geothermal projects have gone first of these 6? Are they just the actors that we're dealing with that are more responsive to us?
Sure. I think the simple answer is that they're simpler contracts to negotiate. The complexity around negotiating the storage component of the solar plus storage resources just requires more time to negotiate. There's just a lot more things that you have to work out ahead of time. The geothermal is those are pretty easy contracts to negotiate.
Geothermal's not new, and I think everybody knows how it's going to work and what the general terms are. So.
Yeah.
Second question is, I think, I can't recall if we had 2 or 3 PPAs from our first RFP, and now this is 6 more, so for a total of 9 or 8, depending on how good my memory is. But can you confirm, are these all additive new resources coming into the California grid?
All with the exception of the one that we're bringing to you in the next presentation, the Coso geothermal, is an existing geothermal resource, but all the other ones are new resources.
Okay, thank you. I didn't remember that from my read last week. My, how time flies. Lastly, can you go to the slide that shows that all of the power that we need to procure by 2030? That one, thank you. So these are the cumulative gigawatt hours between now and 2030, or between next year and 2030?
Between 2021 and 2030, yes, cumulative.
So when I look at this, I see a whole lot of well, it's not empty, but basically empty space. So my question is, does that kind of keep you up at night sometimes? Yeah, well, I mean, in all seriousness.
Well, we'll always have a resource, that's for sure. The lights will always stay on. But does it keep me up at night? No, it doesn't.
And that might have to do just because you're a very sound sleeper, and I don't know. But I know we don't want to lock, as I recall, we don't want to lock everything in advance because then we could lose a bunch of load or whatnot. So what would be, and I'll ask you a bit, if Girish wants to answer as well, what would be a healthy level of us thinking about this at this point when we're thinking all the way out 10 years from now?
Yeah, so we have a minimum requirement that we have to meet. So we certainly want to make sure that we procure sufficient long-term resources to meet that compliance requirement. And then we know that some projects are going to get delayed. And we know that some projects won't perform the way that they're intended to perform just because resources have issues. Plants go down, sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow. And so we're going to overshoot above the standard so that we don't put ourselves in a position where we're not going to meet what's required by law. And so I think an optimal amount is that amount that both allows us to, with some high degree, like maybe a 99% probability, we're going to meet the target all the time, but also balances, like you said, that the potential to lose load, and not just lose load, but technologies change. Prices could go down. We don't want to lock everything in at the same price at the same time because that's not diversifying our risk. So I think for us, we're looking at somewhere of maybe having 40 to 45% of our stuff locked in under long-term contracts would be kind of the max.
We kicked this off, Tony. Remember in the very beginning, we had no long-term contracts, and we came up with a laddered strategy by which staff would go out and fill the buckets, but not all at once, very intentionally. We did that 2017, and then the 2019 RFPs are like mapping to that strategy.
Well, and that's why I asked the question, Howard, because this looks kind of bad, actually. If you really know, but it could be interpreted bad, and I was not sure.
I just wanted everybody here, not every board member started at the very beginning, but there is a very deliberative strategy to not go out and procure every last megawatt that we need right away, but to layer it in over time and allow us the flexibility to follow where the market's going. Girish may have some great comments on this.
Well, I don't know about great, but I'll have some comments. I think there are 2 time periods over which we are hedging. We have one which is a 5-year period, or maybe balancing our portfolio. So we have the 5-year period where we have bands, and you're on the risk oversight committee, so you know that. And then this is pretty much the same principle, but on a longer time scale. What we need to balance this out, and so this is just the clean energy portion. There's a lot going on in here. If I had to venture a guess right now, I'd go maybe a little higher than what Monica said, but not too much higher, maybe around 60%. And the reason being, as you go to these long-term renewable contracts, you actually are getting them very cheap. Because, for example, short-term renewable power is being priced at the Brown Power Index plus $15. When you go long-term, what's the number again? Pretty much at Brown Power prices are even negative. So it's offset by regulatory risk. We don't have a stable revenue base. We talked about direct access risk. So we've got to balance our financial risk with this too. So I think 60%, somewhere between 45 to 60%. But this is a fantastic question, and it gets to the essence of how we need to plan. So I'm sure we'll have maybe a more nuanced answer for you, in the next several months, the next couple of years, as technologies change too.
Yeah, I imagine if we do a 2021 RFP, that will be the kind of the focus of that RFP, is how much should we procure in this, because we're now getting toward the edge, and I think that's going to be the big key driver on that solicitation.
Great. Okay, other questions? Got to just double check, it's a weird spot. Seeing none, let me see if there's any member of the public that wishes to speak on this. Seeing none, if anybody has any final thoughts, I want to make one, which is mostly thank you, because I know a whole bunch of people are putting a huge amount of effort into making this come together, and our goal is to nail it with the CPUC. And as Rod says, the responsible kids on the block. I want to be the trusted and responsible and most thorough kid on the block, and staff is dutifully doing this in spades. So, okay, with that, I think we're going to move right along. Next up is an action item tonight, and we're going to discuss allowing Garish to enter into a renewable power supply purchase agreement. Monica still?
It's me again.
All right, the other half of your job.
The procurement half. Okay, so we have this is an action item, and our request is that you adopt the resolution authorizing the CEO to execute in substantial form the power purchase agreement with Coso Geothermal Power Holdings and any necessary ancillary documents. So the delivery term for this PPA would commence on January 1st, 2022 and go for 15 years through December 31st, 2036. In an amount not to exceed roughly $330,754,000. So that's the request. A little bit of background. Again, our RFP process is how we identified this particular resource. This is an RFP that we did with Monterey Bay Community Power. It's our second joint RFP that we've done with Monterey. We had some basic requirements from that RFP, but essentially we wanted to make a big dent towards meeting our long-term clean goals. Through that process, again, we identified 6 projects, 2 of which one of which you already approved, the other one you're seeing tonight, and then 4 which you'll see in the coming months. So the Coso Geothermal PPA itself is what's called a Bucket 1 or a PCC 1 category renewable energy resource as defined by the California Energy Commission. It's from an existing geothermal plant. Again, it's for 15 years. The project is located in Inyo County, which is down east near the Mojave. We looked it up. It's east of the Mojave Desert. The contract actually has 2 quantities associated with it. For the first 5 years, we'll get the output associated with 43 megawatts of capacity. And then the last few years, 6 to 15, it steps down to 28 megawatts. And that's because of an arrangement they already have in place with another off-taker for those last years. Roughly speaking, this resource will overall meet 7% of our needs, 10% in the first 5 years and 6% in the last years. The structure of the PPA is at a fixed price with an escalator, which also changes in year 6. In terms of how it helps us meet our annual RPS requirements, the Coso project is that one that looks brownish. So you can see it does, whoa, I didn't do that. It does quite a bit towards meeting our annual RPS requirements. It's just like the ORMAT resource. It produces at a very steady level. It's considered a baseload renewable resource, a clean source of resource. So from a compliance, so we have 2 requirements, if you can recall. We have to meet our annual RPS requirements per the state's mandates, and then we also have to meet a long-term RPS procurement mandate, which is set in different compliance periods. So the first compliance period that we have to adhere to is the one that goes between 2021 and 2024. Overall, we have a 40% RPS for that period, mandated by the state. Of that 40%, 65% of it has to come from long-term contracts. That was because they wanted to make sure that when the CCA effort kind of took over the state, that CCAs were doing their part to incent the development of new projects and not just signing short-term contracts. So we've done our part. We currently are at 22%, and with the approval of this geothermal contract, we'd actually be at 29%. And then it kind of increases for each compliance period. I think you've seen this one before, but just to recap, these are the other PPAs that we shortlisted as part of our 2019 RFP. So the recommendation is to approve the resolution authorizing Garish to execute this contract.
Okay, anybody have questions on this? Go ahead, Nancy.
I'm going to be a total nerd.
Sure.
And dig into the details of the staff report. Just 1 or 2 questions. That's not too bad. Page 3 of 5, under the project value and merits, which it has. So it says that including this project, about the second paragraph from the end, the inclusion of this project will result in the incremental annual electricity supply emissions equivalent to 3.8 to 5 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, depending on annual generation comparable to SVCE's de minimis emissions in past years, which the footnote says reached 4.32 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour in 2018 and is expected to be similar in 2019. So my question is just to verify this is going to add up to 5 pounds expected for that coefficient. So it would be roughly between 9 and 10 pounds. Is that correct?
That would be, so yeah, that would be incremental to what we think is going to happen in what happened in 2019. And that, so the 2019 number that we list there and the one before 2019, that's because the resources that we've been procuring through PG&E for short-term renewables come with biomass and geothermal already in those resources. So we don't get to pick from PG&E what we get, what we buy. They give us whatever they want to give us. And so theoretically, if they continue to give us those types of resources when we do short-term procurement from PG&E, we would have those emissions plus the ones from this new geothermal project.
Okay, so this report from the portfolio emissions does not include any other geothermal. It's more from the biomass.
Right.
Okay, so
right.
this is...
There's also the ORMAT project, but it's so small that I don't even think it registers here. It's a small project.
And then there is also an intriguing phrase in the following sentence about it will appear in our content label or be offset through purchase of additional carbon-free resources. So how does that work?
Sure. Exactly. So if we did nothing, we would just, so starting, I'll back up. AB 1110, which is the power content legislation, will require that we start to show the emissions on our power content label for the 2020 portfolio starting in 2021. And so before, we hadn't been showing what those emissions are, these small amounts that we registered in 2017 through 2019. But we'll have to show those on that disclosure that goes out to all of our customers starting in 2021. And it's a small amount, and I don't think that it's insignificant, but it's a pretty small amount relative to, if we were just buying everything from the system, it would be much, much bigger if we were running a natural gas plant. But having said that, if for whatever reason we decided we wanted to show zero, then we have the ability to offset those emissions. We can buy an offset product, or we can over-procure a clean source of energy to offset those emissions and not have it show up on our power content label.
Okay, and so just to be clear to the last comment, this 90%, so this commentary about it being 90% less, so roughly, if we were going to, let's see, I think what you wanted to say is that, I just walk me through this, that conventional natural gas, if you compare geothermal to conventional natural gas, it would be only 10% of the emissions of conventional
or less.
Yeah. And that's just for a small fraction of our overall power supply. So it would be it's not overall 10%. It's like a tiny fraction.
Yeah, it's just resource to resource.
Because it's just a small part of our overall portfolio.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure I followed that. So,
Good to go deep. Okay. Anyone else wish to comment on this item? Rod?
So just so we're clear, I mean, we could choose, the board previously chose to take the PG&E renewables allocation, right?
Purchases, those weren't allocations, we bought this stuff.
Yeah, okay, fine. But we couldn't pick and choose of the resources what we bought. If we wanted to, if going forward we wanted to reject some of these resources, we'd have to reject all of it, all the renewables.
Right, so there's two ways that we can receive renewables from PG&E. One is through their solicitations that they do periodically, where we make an offer to buy some of their resources. In that case, they'll either identify what the resource is, like they did last time and they said it's all solar, or they'll just say it's a PCC1 product, in which case we can't tell them what we want or don't want. The second way that we can get renewables through PG&E is through this allocation process that is being worked through. My understanding is what's being proposed is that if you want that allocation, you have to check the box and you get whatever they give you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, this frankly, this goes to being responsible. We know that in PG&E's territory, CCAs have now taken about half the load, right? Mm-hmm. And it does make sense that these resources then become part of what we are then redistributing effectively. It's going to get generated, and so we have an opportunity to take or leave. But given the paucity, the scarcity of bucket one resources, it really does make sense for us to go ahead and do this.
More than a bucket one, a 24/7 bucket one.
Yeah,
and it was easy to play on an annual basis. It's much harder if we're talking we want to be good grid citizens and be able to provide power 24/7.
Well, and that's why. Do we have any public speakers or not?
No, I haven't finished the questions. As soon as we finish the questions, I will.
Then I'll hold my fire. But yeah,
we'll have a little discussion.
Okay.
Anybody else with questions? Any member of the public wish to speak? You want to give us a thumbs up or thumbs down on this one? Oh. All right, then we'll come back to us. Rod, let's bring out the guns. Let's see what you got.
Okay, fine. I think it is responsible. This is expensive power, but we need base load power, and so I would move that we approve this contract.
We've got a motion and a second. Let me say that if you take into account all the attributes that come with this, I find it hard to really say expensive. I think it's a realistic, complete price. I feel like this is
I like the way you phrase. I mean, that really is the way to think
This is
about
the all-inclusive power. Whereas if we buy solar, we've got to figure out what we're going to do with the duct curve. I mean, we've got to figure out how to fill in the RA element of the solar. I mean, that's the part that's most interesting to me. Is this is the complete package. It's also very well known within the state. The geothermal projects are very well known, and the CPUC respects them. And I think having them as part of our base load and our portfolio just adds to our credibility. And I can't even put a value on adding to our credibility. But you know it because they paid attention to you in Sacramento. So, all right, any other comments on this item? Sure, Rob, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that I'm in support because it actually, again, it gets at that clean net short that we've started talking about, and there is the little bit of worry on annual accounting. We're adding a little bit, but I saw some modeling, and I don't remember the numbers very well, but it was approximately every pound that we add to our annual accounting, we're taking about 10 pounds off of the real around-the-clock accounting. So it's really a 10-for-1 kind of leverage going this way.
Absolutely. Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, let's call this question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That will carry unanimously. Monica, thank you, and thank your team, some of whom are here. Great find for us, and I'm glad we could authorize you guys to move forward. Grish.
Do want to congratulate Monica also on getting this contract to the board before Monterey Bay Clean Power.
Oh, yes, more important.
Oh, you should have told us
So
that
moved.
up front. We could have just skipped the whole discussion.
Could have beaten on my minutes.
Oh, we did?
I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Monica. Okay, moving right along. Item number 5, Executive Committee Report. Oh, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
We did meet on February 24th, and we did provide feedback on the development of a desk reference for current and future board members. The summary of that is staff has spent a huge amount of time identifying the key things that you need to be a successful board member. And we all looked at it and said, boy, those are really detailed. Can we get a few higher level ones in here? We have all forgotten how much you have to learn to serve on this board. And I think this is going to be an exceptional plan to help bring up the new generation of board members here. And we got an update on our built environment programs. Again, congratulations to those who have changed the world and helped us come up with REACH codes. And we talked about our Consumer Resource Center, which will be coming to us at a board meeting soon. And that's all I have on the Executive Committee report. Any questions? Any member of the public wish to speak? Seeing none. Now we're going to go back to Rod. Let's talk about legislative. You got a lot of good news here. You already spilled some of the beans, though.
Yeah, hang on for just a second. Yeah, thank you. You were too fast. So on Wednesday, March 4th, the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee of the Board held its first meeting for the year. The goal of the meeting was to review the 2020 legislative landscape in greater detail, discuss the 2 bills previously mentioned that CalCCA is sponsoring, along with other bills of interest, and prepare for the lobby day as previously discussed yesterday. The meeting opened with SVCE lobbyists Steve Baker and Jennifer Tannehill providing an update on the current Sacramento context, which of course included the bankruptcy. The 2 CalCCA sponsored bills, those are AB 2689 and AB 3014, so 3014, are CalCCA's first bills, and are designed to address issues of data transparency and reform to the state's grid reliability efforts, respectively. Finally, the committee moved to delay election of chair and vice chair so that we could have more in attendance. And on March 10th, as previously reported, we were in Sacramento, and for those of you interested in the new materials that I mentioned before, they look like this. There's one that shows the map of CCAs at present and in the immediate future coming along, showing how much of the state we're covering. There's another showing all the projects that we've been entitling or enabling in California. And finally, there's this terrific chart that shows how we've really moved the needle, right? Oh, here I am, there. And this on the front was very impressive to folks we met with who were in the know in Sacramento, which is an increasingly impressive number of folks and staffers in the legislature. And on the back side, you get a real view of, you get a real view of how all the CCAs are doing with their allocations and the IOUs. And so cumulatively, we really are making a big difference. Different CCAs have different policies and so forth. You can find all these resources at, you go to cal-cca.org, cal-cca.org, and then you go to news, and once you go to news, you get to info resources. And the links, the first 4 or 5 links at the top have these various updated maps. But if you are speaking with other people in the state, as you have LCC meetings and other things, I think these are wonderful talking points. And I know I had a chance to talk to one of the PUC commissioners who is heading the PCIA proceeding, and there's some denial about where we're going. And she basically said, look, there have been a lot of communities that haven't elected to do this, and if you all came in and you said you wanted to do it, if you could get everybody in the state, we'd probably be happy to give you electricity generation. So we have some more evangelizing to do. That's my report.
Nobody said changing the world was easy, and the state legislature is even harder. So thank you for all of that effort. Are there any questions or comments on that item? Then we are going to move right along. Board member announcements or referrals for future items? Seeing none. Don't move, right? We have a special meeting tonight, so the plan is to call...
Director Miller.
Oh, I'm sorry, totally missed you.
No, I just remembered something. I want to take the opportunity to thank Garesh and the Dons and Monica. They've been training myself and George, to your point about bringing the new directors up to speed. So they've done a great job, and I just wanted to publicly thank them.
Excellent. Just for the record, I meet with the same group of people like every 2 weeks too, and so do all of us. So this isn't a one-time thing, just expect
it will
for...
continue.
Yes.
We're not special, George.
You are special.
We're not slow either.
Have they been bringing you steak sandwiches every time? Oh, no, you're not.
You're not in that group yet. Okay, so the plan here is to call our regular meeting to order and then call into session our special meeting, which was duly noticed. And for completeness, do we need to do another roll call?
Do we need to adjourn the first meeting?
We need to adjourn the first meeting.
I thought I just said adjourn it.
You didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought I said we're adjourning the first meeting. Then okay, we adjourn the first meeting, then we'll call to order the special meeting.
And we should do a roll call.
And then we should start with a roll call, even though somebody's standing in the lobby.
Thank you. Chair Miller?
Here.
Vice Chair Smith? Here. Director Rennie?
Here.
Director Sinks?
Here.
Director Abe-Koga? Director Gibbons? Director Elahi?
Here.
Director Tyson?
Here.
Director Flagger?
Here.
Alternate Director Yulo?
Here.
Alternate Director Marshall?
Here.
And Director Ellenberg is currently not in the chambers, but she is present.
Okay, good. We'll call that close enough, I guess. Any public comment on matters not on the agenda? Okay, so this particular agenda item was set up so we could specifically talk about some actions related to COVID-19. I would like Grish to give us a little bit of background. This organization is built its reputation on being flexible and nimble, and within Grish's authority, he's already taken actions to ensure the resiliency of our organization, ensure the health of our employees. And he has some more specific requests, which is what we're going to discuss tonight. But if you could give us an overview of some of the great things that are already in process.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the board. I'm hoping this meeting we can get input from you because each of you are plugged into your cities and Santa Clara County and your own personal experiences with this. I think crowdsourcing as many good ideas as we can would be great, so I look forward to your input at the end of this presentation. So here's our priority, and we are a very small team, and we are doing a lot of critical work, so we want to make sure that we keep the work going and keep all our employees and families healthy. So some of the things we've done already, and I'm going to have different times, if necessary, Kevin Armstrong and Don Eckert also come up and assist with answers to questions you may have. Starting last Friday, we sent an email out to all our staff with information related to this disease and safety precautions we could take. Over here you can see that as of this week, today is a voluntary work from home day. Tomorrow will be a mandatory work from home day. Don's team, Nick Zanato, has actually got us Microsoft Teams, which is something like Slack, where you can create all these different channels to have conversations that are very good for workers who are actually quite mobile. So we've put that in place already several months ago. And so we have that already to allow for a lot of fluid communication when we're not at work. Office signage of best practices is posted all over, and we continue to provide email updates to employees. We have also reached out to all the CCAs in the state, asking what they have done, so to learn from best practices. And we will be bringing back to you some changes to our policies as necessary. Some CCAs have got some additional delegations of authority under their emergency response. So we will be working that and bringing that back to you. We're also going to be gathering staff feedback to make sure that the kind of work environment and our work efficiency continues as we work remotely. You know, this is literally, we are learning and changing as we speak. When we've talked about people working remotely in the past, it's been a few people on a few days. This is completely turned on its head. This may be the majority of our workers working remotely for multiple days at a stretch. And so the kinds of practices and habits, et cetera, that we'll have to develop is going to be different. In terms of the continuity of operations, we're just starting that work, starting with, you know, each of us, if we are unable to work due to being quarantined or being sick for a period of 14 days to a month, whatever period that is, what's our backup plan? So we're working on that. We've reached out to our billing data management operator, Calpine, and they have plans in place both for the customer service side and billing operations side. Our outreach to them will continue because where we were a week to 10 days ago is different from where we are today. I actually know that Director Ellenberg is dealing with this issue as we speak from a county level. So looking at the specific recommendation we have, I'd like to get additional authority from you to offer paid time off for employees. Here's the situation. Say today we give all employees 4 weeks paid time off, which is vacation and sick leave combined. Say someone's taken 3 weeks off already, and they think they're going to take a vacation in fall that they're kind of budgeting for. If they feel a little ill, maybe it's just a cold or whatever, they'll say, hey, I'm going to come in, I don't want to stay away. So because they want to save up that sick leave or the paid time off. I want to take away any kind of disincentive for them to basically take the right action for themselves and for all of us. In thinking about this a little bit more, just over the last 24 hours, talking to Don, staff, we think actually getting even less than 30 days will be fine. I think even 20 days, when I was coming up with the number, I kind of think it's twice the quarantine period, but if you actually authorize even 20 days, that will go for a whole month because of weekends. I also want to factor in, there are going to be folks who, there are going to be false alarms. And we need to factor that in too. So this will give us breathing room, so to speak, for the next month. And then if there's a necessity to come back to you in the next month with a request for an emergency meeting for authorities we may not have, we will do that. Else we will be back in April with an update and maybe a request for additional action. That's my presentation and request.
Okay, so we'll start with questions. I think we're going to start with Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate the quick action on this issue. My question, and I support the recommendations. In terms of the telecommuting, is the practice that you've implemented for this week going to continue on, or is it, will you be adjusting that?
It literally is, we had a all-hands meeting that we called on Monday. It said, we are going to have to adapt. I'm going to call Friday also as a remote day. I think it's important that in these early days, we actually get people not mobile and moving around. And so this point, I'll send an email out to folks. So I think next week we may have multiple days. I would say at least 2, maybe 3. And we're going to see how it works. I know there'll be a lot of work adjustments that we'll have to make, but that's my plan right now.
Great. Well, thank you.
Rod?
Yeah, I'm noting that the resolution is more concrete and answers some of my questions. I mean, it reads, in response to the potential impact of the authority and its employees from contracting the COVID-19 disease, the board hereby authorizes the chief executive officer to grant up to 30 days of additional paid time off to eligible employees that both A, receive a documented positive test result from a COVID-19 test administered by a health provider, and B, are subject to a health provider imposed quarantine as treatment for the COVID-19 disease. Right? So this is
it's quite a bit more limited than
what
as described.
It's more.
Yeah.
So in practice, I think we're going to have to develop procedures around this.
Yeah.
Because I would like to make this, and be happy to ask our lawyer in terms of procedures, because if I don't want someone who just, because of the incubation period, 5 days.
I get it. And so I'm wondering if you need more latitude than this resolution.
Yeah, I mean, right now the conditions are very, very specific. So if you wanted more flexibility there, we probably should modify that language.
Yes, so one way of doing this, maybe, I'm sorry I'm doing this on the fly.
No, it's okay.
So I would suggest, maybe I'm speaking on top of my mind, is grant me this authority for 90 days. So for 90 days, allow me the ability to offer up to 20 days paid time off to deal with COVID-19 and leave it at that. And then we'll develop procedures.
So you want to basically scratch the resolution as written and
modify.
We'll
Modify
it.
Right, modify it.
The substantive portion.
So let me make one comment. Just, we've lived
Yeah.
through this in my own city, and we have had some citizens go in with certain symptoms, and I've watched them get stuck in the system 5 days in ER, and 2 days actually in quarantine, and he didn't have anything. They think it was a reaction to some medication that they had just put him on. And so the whole thing is a little bit weird right now, and just saying COVID-19, you could see some employee getting caught never having it, and I would hope that we would still give Garish authorization, because if a person is sick, we don't want to take the chance. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, not my job, and I don't want to have them wait until some doctor finally says, oh, by the way. So I don't know how we quite word in all the flexibility, but
I
just
think Garish has expressed something that is quite a bit more flexible.
Yeah, but the word COVID-19 in there always makes me worry, because I don't know. I don't want an employee to feel like they have to be here in this environment and us have the outside chance that somebody gets sick for anything, honestly, but COVID-19 also. So I'm with you on the flexibility. I'm just wondering if it's even just too specific to one disease.
So,
microphone.
Somebody say something like COVID-19 and associated or anticipated associated illness or something, like that. Should we
Can I
just
just, maybe the right idea is
Greg's got some thoughts.
to take a 5-minute recess and get this rewritten?
Great idea.
Yeah, Craig had some thoughts. Let me stop for just a second. Is there anybody who has any questions prior to this 5-minute recess? Seeing none, then we're going to take a 5-minute recess and let some people think.
Thank you.
Don't make me use this hammer here, I will. If I could gavel everybody back to order without actually using it. You never want me pounding, because I'm used to pounding nails. Okay, so we have reconvened after a short break, and we're going to turn to our attorney who has some cleverly crafted wording.
I hope so.
Okay.
So, here it is. It's section 1. It will read as follows. In response to the potential impact to the authority and its employees from contracting the COVID-19 disease, the board hereby authorizes the chief executive officer for the next 90 days to grant up to 20 days of additional paid time off to employees for reasons related to COVID-19.
Excellent. Does anybody have any questions on that? Or do we have a motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any further discussion on this?
That be adopt the resolution as amended.
That
It's
was
up to 20 days, right?
Yes.
Just 20 days, yes.
Is it work days, business days? So you exclude the week?
It'd be work days. Yes.
Nancy has a question?
Was there a 90-day?
This had 90-day limit.
It did, okay.
Yeah, it only applies for 90 days. That have to be extended by the board to make it longer.
Is that 90 calendar days?
That'd
Or
be 90 calendar days.
Calendar? 90
Yes.
calendar days to grant up to?
20
Up to
days.
20 days. Up
Up to
to
20
20
days.
working days.
Javid.
Yeah, I think that's probably helpful to the CEO. I'm just trying to figure out if it's a discretion that may be difficult to identify. When you just say for reasons related to COVID-19.
That vagueness works in our favor.
Huh? Does that help us?
I like it that way.
To have that discretion, or?
I think you want it that way.
Or is somebody going to say, yeah, it
Would-
is COVID-19, it may not be, I mean, we just.
Yeah, but would you rather risk it?
Okay.
That's
Just
the.
leave the.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none. Let me just make the most basic of comments, which is we do what we do because of the staff. And this is a case, the other stuff that Garish is doing to make sure the operation runs and the other stuff to keep our staff safe. This is a case where we have to have our staffs back. And so I am super appreciative that everybody is comfortable. And for our staff, my personal advice is please don't come to work sick. But my second thing is, we love you guys, and what you guys need to be healthy, we want to make sure we're there for you. So any other comments? Seeing none, we're going to call this question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. And I believe that we still can do announcements or referrals to staff for future items. Tony?
I found Mr. Carney brought up an interesting idea tonight, and I would just ask staff to look into it a bit more.
Okay. Any other comments or announcements? Seeing none, then I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you guys for being here.